The winter wind in downtown Chicago cut through the streets like a blade, carrying with it the faint aroma of roasted chestnuts from a vendor half a block away. Yellow cabs idled at the curb, their engines humming in the cold, headlights reflecting off patches of damp pavement. A thin mist clung to the air, curling around street lamps and blurring the edges of neon signs. Evan Carter moved at an unhurried pace along the sidewalk, his footsteps steady, the soft tread of clean sneakers barely audible over the city's nighttime hum. He wore a deep charcoal hoodie, pulled up just enough to shade his face from the wind, dark jeans, and a neatly kept pair of black and white trainers. His left hand cradled a slim, leather-bound notebook, the kind that creaked softly when opened. His right hand held his phone, screen dim, but still showing the calendar entry. Maison du Nord. Reservation for 1, 7 p.m. He stopped in front of the restaurant. Maison du Nord stood out even among the city's high-end dining spots. Its facade a blend of glass and dark wood, with a brass-plated nameplate lit by a discreet spotlight. Through the wide windows, Evan could see the glow of amber lighting spilling across white linen tables, diners leaning close over artfully arranged plates, and servers moving like dancers in a slow, practiced rhythm. He took a moment before stepping inside, letting his gaze sweep the scene. A valet in a pressed overcoat moved past him, opening the door for a couple in evening wear. The warmth that rushed out carried the rich scent of truffle butter, seared steak, and freshly baked brioche. Evan stepped in. The door closed behind him with a muffled thud, shutting out the street noise. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting heat of a well-filled dining room, a low murmur of conversation underpinned by the occasional clink of crystal against porcelain. At the host stand, Chad Wilkins stood with one hand resting lightly on a polished walnut podium, a tablet screen glowing in front of him. Chad was in his mid-20s, hair slicked back to a shine, his crisp white shirt and tailored vest looking like they had been steamed only moments ago. His tie was pulled tight, perfectly symmetrical. The moment his eyes met Evan's, his smile appeared, but not the full, easy smile of genuine welcome. This one was quick, thin, and didn't reach his eyes. His gaze flicked downward, scanning the hoodie, the jeans, the sneakers, then back up with the smallest crease in his brow. "Good evening," Chad said, his tone polite but edged with a formality that felt more like a barrier than a greeting. "Evening," Evan replied, calm and measured. "Reservation for Carter, table for 1. Chad's fingers tapped the tablet, though his eyes didn't linger on the screen. "Carter, 7 o'clock?" His voice carried the faintest lift at the end, as if he were inviting Evan to correct himself. "That's right," Evan confirmed. Chad glanced toward the dining room. Couples in cocktail attire, a business group in tailored suits, a woman in a silk dress raising a champagne glass. His eyes returned to the hoodie. "I'm sorry, sir," he began, his voice lowering a fraction, "but we do have a certain dress code. Tonight, we're also at full capacity." Evan's expression stayed neutral. "I'm aware of your dress code. Your confirmation email mentioned it. I've met the reservation time, and I'm here for my table." Chad's lips pressed into something between a smile and a dismissal. "Unfortunately, I can't seat you this evening. This isn't that kind of place." The words hung in the air, sharp and quiet at the same time. Behind Evan, the door opened to admit a pair of laughing guests in expensive coats. Chad's smile warmed instantly for them. The shift so fast, it could have been missed if you weren't looking for it. Evan gave a single nod, not breaking eye contact. "I see." Without raising his voice or showing a hint of anger, he turned, pushed the door open, and stepped back into the night. The warmth and light of Maison du Nord vanished behind him, replaced by the cool bite of Chicago air and the indifferent rhythm of the city. The door closed behind Evan with a soft hydraulic hiss, leaving Maison du Nord's dining room untouched by the blast of cold air that slipped in after him. Inside, the hum of conversation resumed as if nothing had happened. Plates still clinked, wine still poured, servers still navigated the narrow aisles with careful grace. At the host stand, Chad Wilkins adjusted the angle of the reservation tablet, the glow reflecting faintly off the brass nameplate pinned to his vest. His lips curled into a faint, self-satisfied smile. For him, the interaction was already over. Another potential situation avoided, another table preserved for guests who fit the room. But Lily Barrett, a server in her late 20s, had seen enough to know it wasn't that simple. She'd been on her way back from table 12, a tray of empty champagne flutes balanced effortlessly in her hands, when she caught the tail end of Chad's words. She stopped just short of the host stand, shifting the tray to one hand, her brows knitting together. That was the 7 o'clock solo, wasn't it? Carter? She asked quietly. Chad's eyes flicked up from the tablet. Not anymore, he replied, his tone smooth, almost casual. Lily's lips pressed into a straight line. What do you mean, not anymore? We're not overbooked. I saw the open two-top by the window. He gave a little shrug, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge. He wasn't exactly the right fit for this place. For a moment, Lily just stared at him, the words hanging in the air, like a faint bad smell. She set the tray down on the server's station beside the host's stand, her eyes narrowing just slightly. You don't know who he is, she said, her voice flat. Chad's smile widened just enough to be irritating. I know enough. Lily tilted her head, studying him. Do you? Because the way you're acting right now tells me you don't know nearly as much as you think you do. He gave a little half-laugh, dismissive. Relax, Lily. I'm saving the chef from a headache. Can you imagine serving a hoodie in here? People pay for an experience. Yeah, she said, leaning in slightly. And part of that experience is not watching the host turn someone away because you don't like the way they look. Her words landed harder than she expected. Chad's jaw tightened just for a second, before he smoothed it over with another smirk. You've been here long enough to know we set the tone at the door, and tonight I made sure the tone stayed right. Lily didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her tray again and walked toward the kitchen, the soft thud of her shoes muffled by the carpet. But as she pushed through the swinging doors, she caught herself glancing toward the front windows, toward the direction Evan had walked. Something about the way he'd carried himself, the calm in his voice despite the slight in Chad's tone, stayed with her. She didn't know who he was, but she had the sinking feeling she'd just watched someone very important walk out into the night. And she had the even stronger feeling that the restaurant hadn't heard the last of him. The wind met Evan as soon as the door to Maison du Nord closed behind him, curling past his hood and sliding cold fingers down the back of his neck. He adjusted his grip on the slim leather notebook, tucking it closer to his chest. The city's night sounds wrapped around him again. The hiss of tires on damp asphalt, the faint wail of a siren blocks away, a burst of laughter from a couple walking under a street lamp. He didn't rush. Instead, he walked a short distance down the block until the glow of a smaller storefront came into view. A narrow cafe tucked between a florist and a tailor's shop. Its windows were fogged from the heat inside, the glass painted with looping white script advertising coffee, tea, pastries. When he stepped in, the door's bell chimed a soft note, and the scent of freshly ground coffee beans hit him like a warm blanket. The lighting was softer here, yellowed slightly by vintage filament bulbs strung overhead. Behind the counter, a barista with a messy bun and rolled-up sleeves offered him a friendly smile. Evening, she said. What can I get you? Black coffee, Evan replied, his voice calm but unhurried. A few minutes later, he was settled at a table by the window, steam curling from the paper cup in his hand. Outside, the golden-lit facade of Maison du Nord was still visible across the street, bustling and oblivious to the fact that their 7 o'clock reservation was now sitting here instead. Evan placed the coffee down and set his notebook on the table. The leather cover was worn smooth at the edges, the corners slightly rounded from years of travel. He opened it with deliberate care, the faint creak of the spine breaking the quiet at his table. The page he turned to bore a heading in neat block letters. Maison du Nord. Preliminary notes. Beneath it, bullet points marched down the page. Chef André Leclerc. French-trained, known for technical precision. Menu changes seasonally. Current focus. Winter root vegetables, truffle, and game meats. Service reports inconsistent. Some guests note aloof front-of-house interactions. Reputation among peers. Ambitious but still earning its stripes. His pen, a slim black rollerball, moved with quiet precision as he added a new entry. Host refused entry, despite confirmed reservation. cited dress code, other guests admitted without issue, clear judgment based on appearance, interaction polite but dismissive. He paused, tapping the pen lightly against the paper. Then, on the opposite page, he wrote another line in all caps. Michelin Inspector. Private. It was the page where he kept his final impressions, the distilled truth that would eventually find its way into the Michelin database, influencing ratings and, in some cases, altering a restaurant's future. Evan took a slow sip of coffee, the bitter warmth grounding him. He glanced toward the restaurant again. Through the tall windows, he could see the same host station, Chad standing in profile, still greeting new arrivals with that carefully cultivated smile. Guests flowed past him toward their tables, unaware that a silent judgment of the entire operation was being written just across the street. He lowered his gaze back to the notebook. This visit had been meant to be a standard, anonymous evaluation. Food, service, atmosphere. Instead, it had just turned into a case study in how a single moment at the front door could eclipse everything else. And if Maison du Nord thought that moment was over, they were wrong. Upstairs, behind a closed oak door with frosted glass reading Chef's Office, the hum of the dining room was barely a whisper. The sound here was different. The low whir of the wine cooler in the corner, the muted tick of a wall clock, and, from below, the faint percussion of plates being stacked in the kitchen pass. Chef André Leclerc sat at his desk, the glow from a single brass desk lamp casting a warm pool of light over his reservation tablet. The rest of the room was shadowed, the kind of space that seemed deliberately stripped of clutter, save for a few framed black and white photographs of Parisian markets and an old chef's knife mounted in a glass case. He was reviewing the evening's covers, scrolling slowly through the list of booked tables. This was a ritual, double-checking that everything matched his memory, that no one had slipped in unaccounted for. Every so often, a name would trigger a note in his mind. Food blogger, city critic, loyal VIP. Then his eyes stopped. Carter, 7 p.m., table for one. Next to the name, a discreet red dot blinked faintly. Only André, the general manager, and one senior maitre d' knew what that meant. It wasn't a warning, it was a flag, a system the restaurant used for very important guests. And among those, there was one category that always got the red: Michelin inspectors. André leaned forward, tapping the entry. A short coded note appeared. Potential inspector. Confirmed via industry contact. Treat with highest discretion. His stomach tightened. He checked the time. 7:42 p.m. Nearly 40 minutes past the reservation. The chair at that table had never been filled. He snatched the phone from its cradle and punched in the host stand's number. After 2 rings, Chad's voice answered, breezy and unconcerned. Host desk, Chad speaking. Chad, André said, his French accent sharpened by urgency. The Carter reservation. Did you seat him yet? A pause. No, chef. That one's not coming. He wasn't dressed appropriately, so I told him we were full tonight. The silence that followed was so sudden, it was as if the building itself had stopped breathing. André's fingers curled tighter around the handset. You... what? I told him we had a dress code and no space, Chad repeated slower this time, as if he were explaining something obvious. André's voice dropped, low and tight, each word carved from stone. You just turned away a Michelin inspector. On the other end, Chad's composure faltered. That's impossible. He was exactly who we needed him to be, André cut in. And now he is across the street, or halfway home, or writing the words that will decide whether this restaurant's name is printed with 1 star. Or none at all. From the open doorway to the kitchen below, Lily looked up toward the sound of André's raised voice. She couldn't hear every word, but she caught Michelin and Carter, and her pulse quickened. Back in the office, André slammed the tablet closed, the sound echoing against the wood-paneled walls. Where did he go? I think down the block, Chad muttered. André was already on his feet, pulling his coat from the back of the chair. Stay here. Don't speak to anyone. The chef pushed past the office door, his footsteps fast and deliberate. carrying him toward the stairs. In the dining room, guests turned their heads slightly as he strode through, the sharp cut of his coat swinging behind him, his eyes fixed on the front door. By the time Andre stepped into the cold night air, the wind biting against his face, he'd already spotted the faint glow of the cafe sign, 2 doors down. And in his chest, one thought pounded in time with his stride. This dinner isn't over yet. The wind carried the scent of roasted coffee as Andre Leclerc pushed open the cafe's glass door, the small brass bell above it letting out a delicate chime. The warmth inside wrapped around him instantly, melting the cold from his hands and face. The air was thick with the scent of dark roast and fresh pastries, layered with the faint hum of soft jazz coming from an unseen speaker. The barista behind the counter glanced up, eyebrows lifting slightly at the sight of the tall man in a tailored chef's coat, still wearing his charcoal wool overcoat. But Andre's eyes were already searching the room, sweeping past the 2 students hunched over laptops, a young couple sharing a plate of croissants, and finally landing on the far corner by the window. Evan Carter sat alone, his back straight, a paper cup beside him, and that leather-bound notebook open in front of him like a private file. A pen rested between his fingers. His head was bent slightly as he wrote, the streetlight from outside catching just enough of his face to reveal a calm, focused expression. Andre's pulse thudded in his ears. He crossed the small space between them, his polished shoes making no sound on the cafe's worn wooden floor. Mr. Carter? Evan looked up slowly, his pen pausing mid-sentence. His eyes, a steady brown, took in the chef's presence without surprise, as though he'd been expecting him. Yes, he said evenly. I am Chef Andre Leclerc, from Maison du Nord. Andre's voice was low, the French lilt more pronounced now. I believe we had the honor of your reservation this evening. Evan's gaze didn't waver. You had it, he said. And then you didn't. Andre's throat tightened. Please, forgive the reception you were given. It was a mistake, an inexcusable one, and it does not reflect the standards of my house. Evan set the pen down, closing his notebook partway but leaving one hand on it. Your host seemed confident it reflected them perfectly. Andre exhaled slowly. He no longer represents my restaurant. But I cannot undo the moment you experienced at our door. What I can do is invite you back, right now, as my personal guest, and cook for you myself. No waiting, no menus. The best of what we have. Evan studied him for a long moment. The chef's posture was straight, but there was no arrogance in it now, only urgency, and something that felt almost like humility. I'm not sure a plate of food erases first impressions, Evan said finally. No, Andre agreed quickly, but perhaps it can add a second one worthy of the first star we have yet to earn. The words hung there, quiet but heavy. Evan's brow twitched slightly, the smallest acknowledgement that the chef knew exactly who he was. You realize I can't promise you anything, Evan said, voice steady. Andre nodded once. I am not asking for a promise, only the chance to show you what Maison du Nord truly is. Beyond one man's mistake at the door. Evan glanced down at his notebook, then back up. All right, chef, let's see what your kitchen can do. Andre's shoulders eased by the smallest fraction. Merci, he said softly. As they stepped back out into the street, the cold bit harder, but Andre walked with purpose, holding the door open for Evan as they re-entered the golden glow of Maison du Nord. The dining room quieted for a beat as the chef led a man in a hoodie to a prime window table, pulling out the chair for him himself. Some guests watched with mild curiosity. A few, sensing there was more to this than met the eye, leaned subtly to get a better look. The host stand, now manned by a silent junior staffer, stayed conspicuously still. Evan sat folding his hands loosely on the table. Your move, chef, he said. Andre gave a short nod and disappeared into the kitchen, the air behind him charged with a new kind of tension, one that could only be resolved with the first plate. The moment Andre Leclerc disappeared into the kitchen, the dining room seemed to take a collective breath. The hum of conversation carried on, but a handful of tables had already tilted their attention toward the man in the charcoal hoodie, seated at a prime window table, a place usually reserved for regulars, critics, or friends of the chef. Evan Carter sat straight, relaxed but attentive, his leather-bound notebook resting beside the polished silverware. His fingers tapped lightly on its cover as he scanned the room, cataloging details. The quiet efficiency of the bussers, clearing a two-top near the bar, the way the sommelier glided between tables, the subtle citrus scent of freshly polished stemware. From the kitchen, a new rhythm emerged. The usual measured pace of service picked up. Not rushed, but sharpened, as if the entire brigade was leaning into an invisible clock. The pass filled with plates, each one touched personally by the chef before leaving the line. The first course arrived in the hands of Lily Barrett, the same server who had overheard the exchange at the host stand earlier that night. She approached with steady poise, placing a shallow white porcelain dish in front of Evan with the kind of care reserved for breakable treasures. Amuse-bouche, chef's choice, she said, her voice warm but precise. In the center of the plate, 3 paper-thin slices of scallop gleamed under a drizzle of yuzu vinaigrette. Tiny pearls of citrus caviar glistened like frost, and a faint wisp of steam rose from a delicate broth poured tableside. Evan lifted his fork, the tines breaking the scallop's translucence with barely a whisper. He tasted slowly, eyes lowering for a moment as the brightness of yuzu cut through the buttery sweetness of the scallop. He made a small notation in his notebook, then set the fork down with quiet finality. The second course followed almost immediately. A narrow rectangle of duck breast, its skin crisp and golden, resting atop a bed of caramelized parsnips. The plate was brushed with a cherry reduction so dark it was almost black, dotted with roasted hazelnuts for texture. Andre himself emerged to set this one down. Duck, aged 5 days, he said, voice low, accent curling around each word. Finished with black cherry and a whisper of star anise. Evan didn't respond right away, but his pen moved across the page as soon as Andre stepped back. He took a bite, closing his eyes briefly as the duck's richness bloomed on his palate, layered with the spice's faint floral note. Another notation, quick, deliberate. Course after course arrived, each a deliberate escalation. A hand-rolled pasta, filled with wild mushrooms, bathed in a velvety truffle cream. A petite fillet of halibut, its surface just kissed by the pan, resting in a pool of saffron-infused beurre blanc. An intermezzo of shaved apple granita, so cold it left a crystalline tingle on the tongue. Throughout, the dining room's tone shifted. At first, there had been a low buzz of curiosity. Who is he? Why is the chef at his table? But as the meal unfolded, curiosity turned to quiet recognition. Whoever this man was, he mattered. The staff's attention to detail, the way water glasses were refilled the instant they dipped below half, the way plates arrived as if choreographed, extended to every table. But there was an unmistakable extra layer of precision around Evans. Finally, dessert. A smoked chocolate mousse piped into a hand-blown glass dome, the smoke curling lazily inside. Lily lifted the dome with a flourish, releasing a wave of rich cocoa and faint oak into the air. The mousse was topped with sea salt flakes that caught the light like tiny crystals. Evan took his time, savoring each spoonful before jotting one last note. Then he closed the notebook gently, as if sealing the evening inside it. Andre approached once more, hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, "thank you for allowing me to cook for you." Evan met his gaze for the first time since the meal began. "You run a disciplined kitchen, chef," he said evenly. "That much is clear." It wasn't praise exactly, not yet. But in the quiet way Evan spoke, there was the faintest suggestion that the conversation between them wasn't over. The check never came. Andre didn't offer it, and Evan didn't expect it. Instead, as Evan rose, the chef inclined his head in a gesture of respect, the kind reserved for someone whose opinion could change everything. 2 weeks later, Maison du Nord's dining room was unrecognizable. It wasn't the decor. The warm amber lights still spilled across white linen tables. The polished walnut floors still gleamed. But the atmosphere. There was an undercurrent running through every server's step, every polished glass, every quiet exchange between the kitchen and the floor. It was the morning of the Michelin Guide release. The staff had gathered before service, a cluster of white jackets and black vests around the bar. Chef André Leclerc stood at the center, the latest edition of the guide resting closed in front of him like a sealed verdict. The red cover caught the light, its gold lettering crisp and almost theatrical. No one spoke. Even the usual clinking of silverware being rolled into napkins had stopped. The only sound was the muted tick of the antique wall clock above the bar and the occasional hiss from the espresso machine. Andre placed one palm on the guide, his gaze sweeping over his staff. Lily stood near the front, arms folded loosely, her eyes steady. In the back, Chad Wilkins lingered half a step outside the circle, his posture rigid, the smile he usually wore nowhere to be seen. With a slow breath, Andre opened the book and flipped to the Chicago listings. His finger trailed down the column of names, page after page, until it stopped. His expression shifted, just slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a restrained, almost private smile. He read aloud, his voice calm but carrying, Maison du Nord, awarded 1 Michelin star. The reaction was immediate. A ripple of gasps and quiet cheers broke out among the staff. Someone clapped twice before catching themselves, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Lily let out a small breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her eyes flicking briefly toward Chad, who stayed silent. Andre continued, reading the entry beneath the listing. Hospitality begins before the first plate leaves the kitchen. A great restaurant treats every guest as if they might be the inspector. Maison du Nord delivers cuisine with technical mastery, and now, service worthy of its craft. Andre closed the guide gently, as though it were made of something fragile. This is not my star, he said, scanning the room. It is ours, and it is not permanent. It must be earned again every night. Lily's gaze sharpened when she noticed Andre didn't look toward Chad when he said it. And yet, the words seemed to land squarely in his direction. Chad shifted on his feet, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't need to be told outright that his earlier choice had almost cost them this star. The unspoken truth hung in the air. In this business, one moment at the door could outweigh everything that happened on the plate. Miles away in a quiet apartment with a view of the lake, Evan Carter sat at a small desk by the window. Morning light spilled across the leather notebook in front of him, now closed and set aside. He sipped his coffee, the steam curling upward in the cool air. The latest Michelin guide lay open nearby, its pages turned to Maison du Nord. He read the entry once more, then leaned back in his chair. There was no satisfaction in seeing his influence on the page, not the kind most people might expect. For Evan, the real victory was simpler. The knowledge that the next person who walked through that restaurant's door, hoodie or no hoodie, might be met with a different kind of welcome. And across the city, as Maison du Nord prepared for its first dinner service as a Michelin-starred restaurant, the host stand was manned by a new face, one who greeted every guest the same way, no matter what they wore. The lesson had been learned, and this time it was written in gold.